In the heart of a bustling city filled with luxury cars, towering skyscrapers, and designer boutiques, lived a woman named Eleanor Harper. She was in her late 50s, with soft gray hair always tied neatly in a bun and kind eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. Eleanor's life was simple. She lived in a modest apartment above a small bookstore, where she spent most of her days surrounded by books, sipping tea, and tending to her flower pots on the balcony. Her clothes were plain but clean, and her demeanor calm, as if she had no care for the world outside her cozy little bubble. To the wealthy residents of the neighborhood, Eleanor was invisible. They didn't know much about her, nor did they bother to ask. All they saw was an ordinary woman who didn't belong in their glamorous circle. At charity events or high-end restaurants, they whispered behind her back, calling her that quiet lady or the one who lives above the bookstore. Some even made fun of her faded coat and scuffed shoes, assuming she must be struggling financially. To them, Eleanor was just another face in the crowd, a nobody without status or connections. Victoria Langley, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, led the pack of judgmental elites. With her perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive jewelry, and sharp tongue, Victoria thrived on making others feel inferior. One afternoon, while exiting a fancy boutique, she spotted Eleanor walking down the street wearing her old coat. Victoria smirked and turned to her friends. "Look at her," she said loud enough for Eleanor to hear. "Doesn't she realize this is an upscale area? I doubt she can even afford groceries here." Her friends laughed, but Eleanor simply smiled politely and continued walking, unfazed by their cruel words. What these rich neighbors failed to see was that Eleanor carried herself with grace. She never retaliated or showed anger, even when treated poorly. Instead, she went about her life quietly, finding joy in the little things, watching the sunset from her balcony, helping the bookstore owner rearrange shelves, or chatting warmly with the elderly man who sold newspapers on the corner. There was something mysterious about her, too. She rarely talked about her past, and whenever someone asked, she gently changed the subject. Despite being dismissed by those around her, Eleanor seemed content. She didn't crave attention or validation. In fact, she appeared almost amused by the way people judged her based on appearances alone. What they didn't know, and what she kept carefully hidden, was that Eleanor possessed a wisdom far beyond their shallow concerns. While they chased wealth and status, she valued kindness, humility, and inner peace. And though none of them realized it yet, Eleanor held a secret so extraordinary that it would soon turn their world upside down. Eleanor's interactions with the wealthy residents of her neighborhood were few and far between, but every encounter left a mark on them. At least, she often ran into some of these elites at the local coffee shop or grocery store, places where she preferred to keep to herself. Yet, even in those brief moments, they couldn't resist making snide remarks about her appearance or lifestyle. To them, Eleanor was an easy target, a woman who didn't dress like them, talk like them, or carry herself with their brand of polished arrogance. One chilly morning, Eleanor stood in line at the coffee shop, clutching her usual order, a small black coffee and a plain croissant. Behind her stood Victoria Langley and two of her friends, all dressed in designer outfits that screamed wealth. As soon as Victoria noticed Eleanor ahead of her, she leaned over to whisper something to her companions, loud enough for others to hear. "I still can't figure out how she affords to live here," Victoria said with a sneer. "Maybe she's secretly selling those old books from the shop below." Her friends giggled, glancing at Eleanor's worn coat and simple scarf. Another chimed in, "Or maybe she's just waiting for someone to leave her a trust fund." They erupted into laughter, clearly enjoying themselves at Eleanor's expense. But Eleanor didn't turn around or react. She simply paid for her order, thanked the barista with a warm smile, and walked out without giving them so much as a glance. Her silence only fueled their mockery, convincing them further that she was beneath their notice. It wasn't just Victoria and her clique who looked down on Eleanor. It seemed almost everyone in the upper crust of the neighborhood shared this attitude. At charity galas held in grand ballrooms, invitations never reached Eleanor's mailbox. Not that she minded. On the rare occasions when she did attend such events, perhaps because a kind-hearted organizer had extended an invitation, the cold shoulders she received spoke volumes. Conversations would halt mid-sentence when she approached, and polite smiles quickly turned into awkward silences. No one wanted to be seen talking to the poor woman. Even outside social settings, Eleanor faced subtle acts of disdain. Once, while shopping for fresh vegetables at the local market, a well-dressed man bumped into her cart intentionally, spilling a few of her items onto the ground. He muttered under his breath, "Watch where you're going," before striding off, leaving Eleanor to pick up her things alone. Passers-by noticed but pretended not to, unwilling to side with someone they considered insignificant. But what truly set Eleanor apart was how she handled these situations. While others might have retaliated or shown hurt, Eleanor remained composed. She never raised her voice, never sought revenge, and never let their words affect her peace of mind. It was as if she understood something they didn't, that their opinions carried no real weight. Deep inside, Eleanor knew her worth wasn't tied to their approval. And though she kept her thoughts to herself, there was a quiet strength in her eyes, a knowing look that hinted she was playing a game they weren't aware of. Little did they know, their dismissive attitudes were building toward a revelation that would shake their world. For now, however, Eleanor continued living her life exactly as she pleased, unbothered by their shallow judgments. The rich may have believed they held all the power, but sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who choose not to use it, at least, not yet. One crisp autumn evening, as Eleanor sat in her cozy apartment with a cup of chamomile tea and an old novel, the sound of the mail slot clinking broke the quiet. She set her book aside and walked to the door, retrieving a thick envelope that had been pushed through the opening. The envelope was elegant, bearing the insignia of a prestigious law firm she vaguely recognized. Curious but calm, Eleanor opened it and began reading the contents inside. The letter explained that her estranged uncle, Charles Whitmore, a man she hadn't seen or spoken to in decades, had passed away. To her astonishment, he had left her his entire fortune, $750 million. The inheritance included shares in multinational corporations, sprawling real estate properties across the globe, priceless art collections, and various other assets. It was more wealth than Eleanor could have ever imagined, let alone needed. As she read through the details, her hands trembled slightly, though her expression remained serene. Eleanor's mind drifted back to the few memories she had of Uncle Charles. He had been a distant figure in her life, someone who preferred business deals over family gatherings. They hadn't parted on bad terms, but their relationship had faded over time due to sheer disconnection. Still, Eleanor felt a pang of sadness knowing he was gone. Yet, mixed with that sadness was a sense of awe at the magnitude of what he'd entrusted to her. She couldn't help but wonder why he had chosen her, out of all people, to inherit such an immense legacy. For hours, Eleanor sat by the window, staring out at the city lights as cars zipped past below. Her thoughts swirled with questions about how this revelation would change her life, or if it even should. Money had never been important to her. She valued simplicity, peace, and the joy found in small moments. Would accepting this fortune mean losing the life she loved? Or could she use it in a way that stayed true to herself? The next morning, Eleanor decided not to tell anyone. Not yet. She tucked the documents safely away in a drawer and continued her routine as though nothing had changed. She watered her plants, visited the bookstore downstairs to chat with the owner, and bought groceries from the market. When Victoria Langley breezed by with her usual air of superiority, Eleanor offered her customary polite nod, giving no hint of the secret she carried. As days turned into weeks, Eleanor grew more accustomed to the idea of her newfound wealth, though she still struggled with what it meant for her future. She spent hours researching charities, educational programs, and community projects online, imagining ways she could make a difference without drawing attention to herself. For now, she resolved to keep living quietly, observing the world around her with the same thoughtful gaze she always had. But deep down, she knew this chapter of her life was only beginning, and that sooner or later, the truth would come out. Until then, Eleanor chose to savor the calm before the storm, relishing the freedom of being the only one who knew just how much power she truly held. One chilly afternoon, a sudden power outage swept through the neighborhood, plunging the entire block into darkness. Streetlights flickered off, and the hum of air conditioners and appliances fell silent. Inside Eleanor's apartment, the soft glow of candles soon illuminated her living room as she lit them one by one. It was then that she heard a knock at her door. Opening it, she found 3 of her neighbors standing there: Victoria Langley, her ever-present sidekick Margaret, and another woman named Claire, all looking slightly flustered. "Sorry to bother you, Eleanor," Victoria said with forced sweetness, though her tone carried its usual edge of condescension. "The power's out in our building, and we were wondering if we could come in for a bit, just until it comes back on." Eleanor hesitated for only a moment before stepping aside. "Of course," she said warmly, gesturing for them to enter. "Make yourselves comfortable." Her small apartment felt even cozier with the addition of guests. She offered them tea, which they accepted awkwardly, clearly unused to being in such modest surroundings. While waiting for the kettle to boil, Victoria glanced around the room, her eyes landing on a stack of books near the window. "Still reading those old novels, I see," she remarked with a smirk. "Must be nice to have so much free time." Eleanor smiled faintly but didn't respond. Instead, she busied herself preparing the tea, leaving the trio to whisper among themselves. As they sat sipping their drinks, Margaret stood up to stretch her legs, claiming she needed to get some air. Wandering toward the kitchen counter, she accidentally knocked over a pile of papers Eleanor had left there earlier. Flustered, Margaret bent down to pick them up and froze when she saw what was written on one of the documents: "Inheritance Agreement, $750 million. For a split second, no one spoke. Then Margaret gasped loudly enough for everyone to hear. "What is this?" she stammered, holding up the paper. Curiosity piqued, Victoria sprang to her feet and snatched the document from Margaret's hands. Her perfectly manicured brows furrowed as she scanned the contents, her jaw dropping lower with each line. Claire leaned in to read over her shoulder, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Eleanor, who had been watching silently from the doorway, sighed softly. She knew the moment of truth had arrived sooner than expected. Walking over calmly, she extended her hand. "I'd appreciate it if you returned that," she said gently but firmly. Victoria looked up, her face a mix of disbelief and envy. "Is this real?" she demanded, waving the paper. "Are you rich?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. Instead, she took the document from Victoria's trembling fingers and placed it back on the counter. "It's complicated," she said simply, avoiding further explanation. But the damage was done. The room fell silent as the weight of the discovery sank in. Here was the woman they had mocked, dismissed, and treated like an outsider. And she was now revealed to be one of the wealthiest individuals any of them had ever met. Victoria recovered first, trying to mask her astonishment with a brittle smile. "Well, Eleanor, this certainly changes things," she said, her voice tinged with nervousness. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "Because it wasn't relevant," she replied. "And frankly, I didn't think it would matter to you." The rest of the visit passed in uncomfortable silence. When the power finally returned, Victoria and her friends made a hasty exit, their minds racing with questions and schemes. As they stepped out into the hallway, Victoria muttered under her breath, "Unbelievable. All this time, she was sitting on a fortune." Back inside her apartment, Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a quiet sigh. She had known this day might come, but she hadn't expected it to happen quite so soon or in such an accidental way. Still, She couldn't help but feel a twinge of amusement at the irony of it all. For years, they had judged her based on appearances. Now they would see her in a completely different light, and not necessarily for the better. The next morning, news of Eleanor's fortune spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. By the time she stepped out to buy fresh bread from the market, whispers followed her everywhere. People who had once ignored her now greeted her with exaggerated smiles and overly friendly gestures. Even the elderly newspaper vendor tipped his hat and called her ma'am for the first time ever. It was as if an invisible switch had flipped, turning Eleanor from a nobody into the most fascinating person in town. Victoria Langley led the charge in this sudden transformation. Within hours of discovering Eleanor's wealth, she began calling her dear friend in conversations with others. She sent bouquets of flowers to Eleanor's apartment, with notes gushing about how grateful she was to know such an incredible woman. Margaret and Claire joined in too, bombarding Eleanor with invitations to lunches, spa days, and exclusive parties they swore she simply couldn't miss. Their efforts were transparent, but Eleanor played along, accepting their invitations politely while keeping them at arm's length. Reporters soon caught wind of the story, camping outside her building and snapping photos whenever she appeared. Tabloids ran headlines like "From Modest to Millionaire," "The Mystery of Eleanor Harper," and speculated wildly about her past. Some claimed she was a secret heiress who had been living undercover. Others suggested she might have ties to royalty or even espionage. Despite the frenzy, Eleanor remained unfazed. She declined interviews, avoided the cameras, and continued her quiet routines as if nothing had changed. But not everyone was eager to jump on the bandwagon. A young journalist named Alex Carter saw something different in Eleanor. Unlike his colleagues chasing sensational stories, Alex was intrigued by her humility. He noticed how she carried herself with grace despite the chaos surrounding her, and he wanted to understand why someone with such immense wealth chose to live so simply. Determined to uncover the truth, Alex began observing her movements, waiting for the right moment to approach her without causing a scene. Meanwhile, Eleanor decided to test the loyalty, or lack thereof, of those around her. She anonymously donated millions to local charities, funding projects that benefited struggling families, schools, and small businesses in the area. Her contributions came with no fanfare, just a note signed "A Friend." Word of these generous acts quickly spread, earning widespread gratitude from the community. However, when Victoria heard about the donations, she seized the opportunity to claim credit. At a charity gala she hosted, she stood at the podium and declared, "It is my honor to support our wonderful neighborhood," implying that she had orchestrated the gifts herself. Eleanor watched silently from the sidelines, amused by Victoria's audacity. She could have exposed the lie right then and there, but chose not to. Instead, she let Victoria bask in the false praise, knowing the truth would eventually come out. For now, Eleanor preferred to observe, letting the actions of those around her reveal their true colors. As the days passed, Eleanor found herself reflecting on human nature. She saw how quickly people changed their attitudes when money entered the picture, proving that many valued wealth above character. Yet amidst the noise and flattery, she also noticed glimpses of sincerity. From the bookstore owner who thanked her sincerely for her kindness over the years, to Alex, whose quiet persistence hinted at genuine curiosity rather than greed. These moments reminded her that not everyone was swayed by material wealth, and that some connections were worth nurturing. Though the world around her had shifted dramatically, Eleanor stayed rooted in her principles. She knew the attention wouldn't last forever, and when the dust settled, only authentic relationships would remain. Until then, she resolved to use her newfound influence wisely, helping those who truly needed it while staying true to the simple life she cherished. Eleanor's plan to test the loyalty of those around her began to unfold in unexpected ways. Her anonymous donations had sparked a wave of gratitude throughout the community, with people praising the mysterious benefactor who seemed to care deeply about their struggles. However, Victoria Langley's blatant attempt to take credit for the generosity didn't sit well with everyone. Alex Carter, the young journalist, was one of the few whom noticed the discrepancy. Something about Victoria's self-congratulatory speech at the gala felt off to him, and he decided to dig deeper. Alex started by interviewing recipients of the donations. He spoke to teachers whose classrooms had been refurbished, parents whose children now had access to free after-school programs, and shopkeepers whose businesses had been saved from closure. Each person described how the funds arrived anonymously, accompanied only by a simple note, "A friend." None of them mentioned Victoria or any other prominent figure being involved. The pieces began to fall into place, and Alex realized that the true benefactor was someone else entirely. Meanwhile, Victoria continued basking in the spotlight, milking the attention for all it was worth. She hosted another high-profile event, this time inviting Eleanor as a token gesture to legitimize her claims. "Eleanor, darling," she cooed over the phone, "you simply must attend. After all, we're practically family now." Though Eleanor agreed to come, she did so with a quiet resolve. This would be the night she revealed the truth, not just about the donations, but about the kind of person Victoria truly was. On the evening of the gala, the ballroom buzzed with chatter as guests mingled under glittering chandeliers. Victoria took center stage once again, delivering a rehearsed speech about her vision for the community and thanking everyone for their support. Just as she finished, Eleanor stepped forward, drawing gasps from the crowd. Dressed in an elegant yet understated gown, she carried herself with quiet authority. "Thank you, Victoria, for your kind words," Eleanor began, her voice steady and calm. "But I feel it's important to set the record straight. The recent donations to our community were not made by you or anyone else here tonight." A murmur rippled through the room as all eyes turned to her. "They came from me." The room fell silent. Victoria's smile faltered, her face turning pale as she struggled to process what Eleanor had just said. Before she could respond, Eleanor continued, "I chose to remain anonymous because I believe acts of kindness should speak for themselves. Unfortunately, some people can't resist taking credit for things they haven't done." Her gaze locked onto Victoria, who shifted uncomfortably under the weight of her words. As the truth sank in, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Guests exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to applaud or retreat. Some quietly slipped away, embarrassed by their earlier fawning behavior toward Victoria. Others approached Eleanor afterward, expressing genuine admiration for her humility and generosity. Alex, watching from the sidelines, finally saw his chance to speak with Eleanor. After the crowd dispersed, he approached her cautiously. "Ms. Harper," he began, "I'd love to hear more about your story. Not for sensationalism, but because I think people need to know there's still goodness in the world." Eleanor studied him for a moment before nodding. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but only if you promise to focus on what truly matters. The work, not the wealth." That conversation marked the beginning of a new chapter for Eleanor. While Victoria's reputation crumbled under the weight of her lies, Eleanor found herself surrounded by people who valued her for who she was rather than what she owned. Through Alex's thoughtful reporting, her story reached a wider audience, inspiring countless others to prioritize kindness and integrity over material success. And though Eleanor remained humble, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, knowing that her actions had exposed the hollowness of greed and celebrated the beauty of authenticity. The fallout from Eleanor's revelation at the gala was swift and merciless. Victoria Langley, once the queen of the neighborhood, found herself ostracized by the very people she had tried so hard to impress. Her attempts to explain or justify her actions only made things worse, as each excuse sounded more desperate than the last. The same friends who had fawned over her now avoided her calls, whispering behind her back about how she had lied to steal the spotlight. Within weeks, Victoria became a pariah, her name synonymous with greed and deceit. Eleanor, on the other hand, handled the aftermath with grace. She didn't gloat or revel in Victoria's downfall. Instead, she focused on using her platform for good. With Alex Carter's help, She agreed to share her story, but on her terms. In a series of carefully crafted articles, Alex highlighted not just Eleanor's wealth but her values: humility, kindness, and a deep commitment to helping others without seeking recognition. Readers were captivated by the tale of a woman who chose simplicity over extravagance, even after inheriting unimaginable riches. One article, titled "The Quiet Billionaire," went viral, sparking conversations across the country. People marveled at Eleanor's decision to live modestly despite her fortune, while others admitted feeling inspired to rethink their own priorities. Letters poured in from strangers thanking Eleanor for reminding them that true worth isn't measured by bank accounts but by character. Some shared stories of their own struggles, expressing gratitude for her anonymous donations, which had changed their lives in ways they could never repay. But Eleanor wasn't content to simply inspire from afar. She began taking small steps to engage directly with the community, attending local events and meeting those she had helped. At first, she worried that people might treat her differently. After all, everyone now knew she was a billionaire. To her relief, most interactions remained genuine. Neighbors who had once dismissed her now greeted her warmly, apologizing for their past behavior. Even the bookstore owner downstairs invited her to a reading session, joking that he'd known all along she was one of the good ones. Still, not everyone welcomed her newfound visibility. A few opportunists lingered, hoping to exploit her generosity. One man showed up at her door claiming to be a distant relative, asking for financial support. Another sent letters pleading for funds to launch what turned out to be a fraudulent business idea. Eleanor dealt with these situations firmly but kindly, redirecting them to legitimate resources where they could seek help if truly in need. Through it all, Alex continued documenting Eleanor's journey, growing increasingly impressed by her wisdom and resilience. During one interview, he asked her why she chose to stay humble despite having every reason to embrace luxury. Eleanor smiled thoughtfully before answering. "Money can give you comfort, but it can't give you peace, not the kind that comes from knowing you've lived honestly and helped others along the way. I've always believed that life is richer when we focus on what we can give, not what we can take." Her words resonated deeply with readers, many of whom began reevaluating their own lives. Inspired by Eleanor's example, some started volunteering at shelters or mentoring young students. Others organized fundraisers to support causes close to their hearts. Slowly but surely, Eleanor's influence rippled outward, creating waves of positive change far beyond her quiet little neighborhood. As for Victoria, her public humiliation served as a cautionary tale. Once admired for her charm and confidence, she was now seen as a symbol of everything wrong with chasing status and wealth at any cost. Though Eleanor harbored no ill will toward her former tormentor, she couldn't deny feeling a sense of justice in seeing the truth come to light. It wasn't about revenge. It was about exposing the emptiness of valuing people based on appearances rather than substance. By the time winter arrived, Eleanor's life had transformed in ways both expected and unexpected. She still cherished her simple routines, finding joy in tending to her flowers and sipping tea by the window. But now she also embraced her role as a quiet force for good, using her resources to uplift others and challenge societal norms. For Eleanor, this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of something far greater. As spring arrived, Eleanor's life settled into a new rhythm, one that balanced her love for simplicity with her desire to make a difference. She continued living in her modest apartment above the bookstore, rejecting offers from real estate agents eager to sell her luxury penthouses or sprawling estates. "This place feels like home," she would say with a smile whenever someone asked why she hadn't upgraded. Her flower garden on the balcony flourished under her care, blooming with vibrant colors that seemed to mirror the warmth she brought to those around her. Eleanor's impact on the community grew steadily, but not in flashy ways. Instead of hosting extravagant fundraisers or appearing on television, she worked quietly behind the scenes, ensuring her efforts reached the people who needed them most. She funded scholarships for underprivileged students, established grants for struggling artists, and revitalized local businesses hit hard by economic challenges. In every project, she insisted on remaining anonymous, believing that kindness should speak for itself without seeking applause. Alex Carter remained one of the few people Eleanor trusted completely. Their friendship deepened over time as they collaborated on meaningful initiatives, such as building a community center where children could learn and play safely. Alex often marveled at how Eleanor managed to stay grounded despite her immense wealth. "You could have anything you want," he once told her during a quiet moment at the bookstore. "Why do you choose this life?" Eleanor thought for a moment before answering. "Because happiness doesn't come from having more. It comes from being more. I've seen what chasing money and status can do to people. It leaves them empty, always wanting something else. But when you focus on helping others, when you find joy in the little things, you realize you already have everything you need." Her words stayed with Alex long after their conversation ended. He wrote an article about Eleanor's philosophy, which resonated deeply with readers worldwide. People began referring to her as the quiet philanthropist, a title she accepted humbly, though she preferred to remain out of the limelight. To Eleanor, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about creating a legacy of compassion and integrity. Meanwhile, Victoria Langley faded into obscurity, her name rarely mentioned except in whispers of caution. Once the epitome of high society, she now struggled to rebuild her reputation, though few were willing to forgive her past behavior. Some might have pitied her, but Eleanor chose to let go of any lingering resentment. "We all make mistakes," she told Alex when he asked if she felt vindicated. "What matters is whether we learn from them." By summer, Eleanor had become a beloved figure in the neighborhood, not because of her wealth, but because of her unwavering kindness and humility. Neighbors no longer judged her based on appearances. Instead, they admired her for the person she truly was. Children ran up to greet her on the street, calling her Miss Eleanor, while shopkeepers saved her favorite books and pastries. Even the elderly newspaper vendor made sure to set aside a copy of the daily paper just for her. Though her life looked much the same as it always had, there was a subtle shift in the air, a sense of connection and belonging that hadn't existed before. Eleanor found herself surrounded by genuine friendships, built on mutual respect rather than superficial admiration, and while she still preferred solitude at times, she cherished these moments of human connection more than ever. As the sun set on another day, Eleanor stood on her balcony, watching the city lights twinkle below. She thought about how far she'd come, from being dismissed as a nobody to becoming a beacon of hope for so many. Yet none of it mattered to her as much as the simple truth she had always known. True wealth isn't measured by what you own, but by how you touch the lives of others. With a contented sigh, Eleanor turned back inside, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. For the first time in years, she felt at peace, not because of the fortune she possessed, but because of the life she had chosen to build. It was a life defined not by riches, but by purpose. And in that, she had found her greatest treasure.